month of Elul is very famously an acronym for the words Ani l'daidi v'daidi li. Aleph Lamed Vav Lamed stands for Ani l'daidi v'daidi li, literally, I am for my beloved, and my beloved is for me. That is the acronym of Elul. It's brought in Mishnah Brura, it's brought everywhere. However, it seems to be very inappropriate for the month of Elul because Ani l'daidi v'daidi li, what does that got to do with Elul? The acronym should have something to do with Yom Adin, with doing tshuva, with a fear of a Yom Adin. What is Ani l'daidi v'daidi li? It sounds appropriate for the month of Adar, Purim, maybe Simchas Torah. Ani l'daidi v'daidi li. There's a loving relationship. The relationship of Elul and Aseres Yemei Tshuva seems to be one of Yira, one of a pachad of the Yom Adin. Perhaps being Mamlech Hashem, looking at Hashem as a Melech. Melech, what does that have to do with Ani l'daidi v'daidi li? So my goal this evening is to give you an appreciation of Ani l'daidi v'daidi li, what it means, and obviously I think we can see in it a sense of the avodah of the days that are to come. I should mention the yesod I'm going to tell you is from Leket Siches Musa, from Rabbi Isaac Sher. The name of the mimer is Ani l'daidi v'daidi li, although I'm elaborating a little more than what it says there. Let me begin with a concept from Nach. In Klal Yisrael, at the time that the Jewish people had a Malchus Yisrael in this country, in Eretz Yisrael, the judicial system, the system of government, had two parts to it. The Ran in Drasha Yud Aleph, in Drashas Haran, explains as follows. He explains that there's the Mishpat HaSanhedrin. There's one part of the court system which is headed by the Sanhedrin, the Mani Batei Dinim, and this court system worked by the book, worked by the rules of the Torah, the rules of the Shulchan Aruch. There are certain set rules. Someone steals, under certain conditions he pays double, certain conditions he pays daled v'hei. Everything we learn about in the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch, that was the Mishpat HaSanhedrin. There's no difference in the Sanhedrin if someone steals because he hates the other fellow, and therefore he's stealing from him, or if the person who steals is a woman who doesn't have bread to feed her children, and she's stealing bread. Now you and I understand that in Shemayim, it's not the same Aveira. It's not the same Aveira if a person steals from someone because he hates him, or if a person steals because he has to feed his children. But in the Mishpat HaSanhedrin, it's identical. The Sanhedrin works by the book. It's a technical Mishpat, and the Psak is based on the halachas of the Torah. The way it works in Shemayim is for Shemayim. The way it works in Bezdin is given with certain set rules. There's a second part of the system, and that's called the Mishpat HaMelech, the king. We find that the kings in Navi were judges as well. You all know that Shlomo HaMelech was a judge, the famous incident of the two women fighting over a baby. David HaMelech was a judge. He sat in Mishpat. In Nach, we find that Avshalom, in order to stir rebellion, started up with the psakim, with the Batei Dinim of David HaMelech. He said, David Paskin's wrong. I would pass. He went to whoever lost it in Torah and said, if I had been the judge, I would have paskin for you. What does a Melech have to do with the Bezdin, with the Sanhedrin? Melech is not on the Sanhedrin at all. The Mishpat HaMelech, says the Ran, is a right. The king has a right to change rules based on circumstances. If you came before the king for judgment, the king could change. He could say a woman who stole to feed her children doesn't have to pay kefil. Her din is different. We find this in Navi. Those of you who learn Navi know that there's an incident which is brought before David HaMelech, with a rich man who had a neighbor who was a poor man. The poor man owned one sheep, and the rich man, the neighbor, had guests, and he was too cheap to use his own animals. He went and stole the one sheep of his neighbor. He stole it to feed his guests. So this mishpat is brought before David, and David paskins ben moves ha'ishahud, the fellow who stole the sheep, is chayav misa. Chayav misa for stealing a sheep? The mishpat hamelech takes circumstances into account. The cruelty of a rich man stealing the one sheep of his neighbor, ben moves ha'ishahud. There's another incident in Navi where it's the reverse, where someone killed his brother, and David HaMelech is approached by the mother of the two children, says, I only have two children, one killed the other, you're going to kill him, I'll be left with no one. And David pardons this person. David says, not chayav misa, he was punished, but not chayav misa. That means the Mishpat HaMelech is different than the Mishpat HaSanhedrin. The Sanhedrin is by the book. It's by the rules, and that's it. There's no shinoi. The Melech has a right to pardon people. The Melech has a right to paskin more stringently or more leniently. That is the Melech's job as the one who runs the country. He has a right to change the Mishpat as it is. The Yisayid of Elul, the Yisayid of Aseret Yemei Tshuva, is to come to Yom Kippur, to come to the Yom Adin, and beg HaKadosh Baruch Hu not to judge us with Mishpat HaSanhedrin, not to judge us by the book, but to judge us with a Mishpat HaMelech, with a Mishpat which takes into account other things, other circumstances, other things that have to do with the Yom Adin. For example, we say on the Yom Adin, Zechar lanu bris Avram v'akedas Yitzchak. What does that have to do with the din? We learned the din is a kaf maznayim, it's a balance scale. Your mitzvahs of the year get put on one side. God forbid, your averis of the year get put on the other side, and you see which side is heavier. What does akedas Yitzchak have anything to do with the judgment of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? It has nothing to do with it. What does the fact that there was an Akedah have to do with Tav Shinai and Vav for me? It doesn't seem to make sense at all. Many of the words that we say in our davening on these days, on the days of Slichus also, seem to make no sense if you're talking about a strict mishpat. We say a few times in Yamim Neiran, we say to God, Al tovai b'mishpat imanu, ki lo yitzdak lefanecha kol chai. Don't bring us to judgment, because we're in trouble. It seems to be a strange thing to say Yom Kippur afternoon. You have to whole Rosh Hashanah, and we say, Rabbi Shalom, you know what, let's call this off. Al tovai b'mishpat imanu. What do the words mean? Al tovai b'mishpat imanu. Ki lo yitzdak lefanecha kol chai. The answer is we want Mishpat HaMelech. I'll tell you an incident that happened to me many years ago. I got a ticket in Brooklyn for driving the wrong way down a one-way street. Now, it's not something I typically do. And it happened in Williamsburg, in what was then a warehouse section. There was a wedding in the area, and the streets there at the time were full of graffiti. All the street signs were ripped down, and there wasn't any one-way sign on the street. And I had parked, gone to a wedding, I came back, I drove down the street. So a policeman pulls me over. I think he was filling his quota of tickets by staying on that corner that day. Policeman pulls me over, he says, you're going the wrong way down a one-way street. I said, look, there's not a single sign one way. He says, tell it to the judge. He gives me a ticket. Next day, I got one of the bus drivers in yeshiva, to go down, take pictures of the four corners. In those days, you had to develop the pictures. And so that when I go to court, I can show them there's no one-way sign. So I mentioned this somehow in shul, in maybe about the Gemara Shir. I mentioned it about how whatever the mussar there was to learn from such a ticket. So apparently the word got to someone, and if someone calls me on Monday or Tuesday, and he says to me, I heard you got a ticket and you're going to court. I said, yeah. He said, well, what's the court date? So I pulled out my the correspondence I had, and it said, I don't remember, let's say January 10th. He says, January 10th? Okay, I'll call you back. So about a day later, he calls me back. He says, January 10th is no good. Don't go to court on January 10th. Ask for postponement. I said, why is January 10th no good? He says, just trust me, January 10th is no good. Fine. I asked for a postponement. So a month later, he calls me, what's your new date? I told him, let's say March 8th. March 8th, I'll call you back. Calls me back. He says, March 8th is great. Keep March 8th. I honestly didn't know what in the world he was talking about. But okay, maybe he reads the stars and March 8th is great. Okay. But I found out what he meant, because on March 8th, I went into the court, the municipal court in Brooklyn. And there's a big chart. You look for your name and which courtroom you're in, and they go one after the other. They judge people. So I see courtroom number of such and such. I walk into the courtroom, and even though I was right, I was a bit nervous walking in to a courtroom. As I walk in, I see the judge behind the bench. He's a fellow that comes to the Navi Shir every Motzei Shabbos. I know the guy. Apparently he was off January 10th, but I walk in, and I didn't say hi or anything. I don't want to get in trouble. But you sit, you wait. He's hearing the cases as they come in. The fellow ahead of me was a dark-skinned fellow who apparently does not attend the Navi Shir because he was found guilty. And then I went up with my pictures. I don't even need my pictures anymore. I went up, and the officer was there. And the officer read from a paper how he caught me driving the wrong way down a one-way street. And I showed my pictures. It was a wasted thing because I was really innocent. But what do you know? The judge said, okay, the pictures look right. Threw out the ticket. So I said to myself, that's what Rabbi Isaac Sher is talking about. When you come to the Yom Adin, it's scary. It's frightening. Who wants to have a balance scale and they throw your Averis on one side, your mitzvahs on the other side? It's a frightening thing to have a Mishpat HaSanhedrin. I'd rather have a Mishpat HaMelech. I know the Melech. I tell the Melech, remember my Zayda Yitzchak? Remember? I have schusim. Zchalon B'Savram, Akedas Yitzchak. I mentioned all of the Avis. I mentioned Anenu, like you answered Eliyahu, and Chananya Azariah, Mishal and Azariah, just like you answered every Daniel B'Gavarayas. I say, Judge, I know you. It's a different mishpat. We're striving to have a different judgment, a mishpat hamelech, of someone we know. This explains a davar tamua in Shulchan Aruch. As you know, during Aseres Yemei Tshuva, we say hamelech hamishpat. Instead of melech oyev tzedakah o mishpat. Now the Sfardim have it really tough, because for us Ashkenazim, if we mess up, we don't have to repeat Shemoneh Esrei. You say melech oyev tzedakah o mishpat, you don't have to repeat Shemoneh Esrei. HaMelech HaKadosh you have to get right, but that's early in Shemoneh Esrei. It's before we started daydreaming at that point. Sfardim have it really tough. When you guys get up to, the Mechaber Paskins, if you say Melech Oyev Tzedakah or Mishpat, you have to repeat Shemoneh Esrei. I once asked, a friend of mine is a Rav in a Sephardic shul, asked him, what do you guys do? You must have so many people repeating Shemoneh Esrei. He said, no, we're not like the Ramah on this one. That's what he told me. I'm not kidding. I like to. So Ramah says, why do you have to repeat Shemoneh Esrei? If you say Melech Oyev Tzedakah Mishpat, you said Melech, you said Mishpat. Well, what's with the Beis Yosef? Why is it such a big deal to say HaMelech HaMishpat? But according to this, it's very geschmack. There's a fundamental change. When you say Melech Oyev Tzedakah U'Mishpat, you're saying that the Rabbi Shalom loves judgment. He loves Mishpat, which is Mishpat HaSanhedrin, Mishpat HaBezdin, Hashiva Sheftenu Kavari Shaina. We talk about the judgment by the book. Seres Yemei Tshuva, we say Rabbi Shalom. We're not looking for the Mishpat HaSanhedrin. We're looking for the Mishpat HaMelech. HaMelech HaMishpat is a fundamental change. We understand the Beis Yosef. HaMelech HaMishpat, we'd say, Rabbi Shalom, we want the judgment of Melech, not the judgment of a Sanhedrin. We want to recognize you as the Melech HaMishpat. And if you pay attention to your davening, on Yom Noraim, you'll see that this is clear in a number of places. We say, Be'ein Melitz Yosher, if there's no Melitz Yosher, there's no one to speak favorably for me in the heavenly courts. Be'ein Melitz Yosher mul Magid Pesha, Tagid li Yaakov, Devar Chayko Mishpat, it's Hatkenu b'Mishpat. That means, if there's no positive judgment for me, upstairs in heaven, mul Magid Pesha, opposite the angels that tell of my sins, Tagid li Yaakov Devar Chayko Mishpat, V'tzadkenu b'Mishpat, HaMelech HaMishpat. We say, if I can't make it by the book, remember Yaakov Avinu. Remember the others. Tzadkenu b'Mishpat, HaMelech HaMishpat. We're looking for the judgment of a melech, the judgment of a king, as opposed to the judgment of a strict, by the book court system. And that is the goal of Ani L'Daidi V'Daidi Li. I walk into the courtroom, I look at the king, the judge, I want to recognize him. You walk in, you look at the judge, he's a friend, he's somebody who's beloved to you, so you're relaxed. It's a different judgment. It's still a Yom HaDin, but it's a different judgment. Other things are taken into account. That's the goal. We say, Slach no pen ye'onshu meruchamecha. Forgive us, those on who you have mercy shouldn't be punished. Lavoin ruchamecha shachach v'hisilasecha v'raimemecha. Say, God, avoin ruchamecha shachach. God, please forget some of the averis. A strange thing to say to Rabbi Shalom. Avoin ruchamecha shachach. God, let's forget some of the sins. The theme is the same. Atavai b'mishpat imanu. On Yom Kippur we say, Atavai b'mishpat imanu, k'le'istak l'fanecha kol chai. What's Atavai b'mishpat imanu? What are you talking about? You have a Kabbalah that's a Yom HaDin. Atavai b'mishpat imanu, k'le'istak l'fanecha kol chai. So the idea is this idea. The idea is that Elul, as you made sure, there's a shortcut, there's a way to make the court system tilted in your favor. And that is, Ani L'Daidi V'Daidi Li. That's the avodah of his skarvas to the Rabbi Shalom. That's what we look for. What's the avodah of Elul? What's the avodah of Elul? The avodah of Elul is Hiddur Mitzvah. Look in halacha. Look in halacha, most famously to be machmir on pas palter, something we have plenty of in Chutz La'aretz. I don't know in Eretz Yisrael. How are you machmir on pas palter? Baruch Hashem, it's all pas Yisrael here. In America, we have plenty of things to be machmir on. To be machmir in Hiddur Mitzvah, that's really what it is. That's really what it is. We have by us in Shul that we don't have a Vesikin minyan all year. From Meshchai Deshel to Yom Kippur, we have a Vesikin minyan. It's not that much earlier. And that's the avodah. What's the avodah of these days? The avodas of these days is to be more mahader in the mitzvahs you do. Why? Ahava comes from Hiddur Mitzvah. If you want ani l'daidi v'daidi li, to keep the mitzvahs, that's our obligation. To keep the Shulchan Aruch, it's our obligation. But there's a klal in life, if you want to show love to someone, you have to do something extra. When you do what you have to do, it doesn't show you love the person. It shows you're an honest person, you're a straight person. You don't show love by doing what you need to do, what you're obligated to do. A chas and kala know that the memorable moments of their engagement are not the moments where things that they have to do are done, that they're obligated to do are done. It's the moments that they do something extra, something more. In the feelings of ahava, the extra trinket or card that's exchanged has more value than the engagement ring. Because the engagement ring, you gotta do. When a woman gets an engagement ring, she judges, is it nice enough? But when you get something extra, when you go out of your way for someone, that shows ava. Ava is doing something you don't have to do. That's not expected of you. That shows an ava. The avodah of these days is to have a connection to the Rabbi Shalom, to connect to him, to do things that you don't have to do, to be mahader in the avodah, to have a personal relationship, ani l'daidi v'daidi li, to feel a hergish of a connection to the Bairei Olam. That's the avodah of Elul. That's the idea of Yom HaZikaron. There's no shichel of nekise kevedecha. The Yom HaZikaron is an idea of a day in which we ask the Rabbi Shalom to remember other things. Zachalanu bris avos. Remember the relationship. Remember the shaychis. Remember the tshuka, the desire. That's the avodah of these days. And I think it's fair to say that what I'm sharing with you today is not a vart or a vertel, but the yesod of Yamim Le'Roim, the yesod of these days, the yesod of the avodah, the effort to do something extra, to do something more. It's an avodah in Beit Adam L'Chaveirei too. You want to have a relationship with someone, go out of your way for the person. Small things you do are meaningful. You bring someone a cup of water when he's sitting and learning, and he may be thirsty. It's meaningful, because you don't have to. The fellow works in the cafeteria and gives you a whole meal, you don't feel love for him, no matter what he's serving, because he has to. When you don't have to, that's something else. So this is the avodah of these days. That's Elul.